All right, everyone, you may have seen that self-proclaimed women's rights leader Linda Sarsour was calling for a jihad against Trump. She proclaimed, of course, after when even the legacy media and parts of the left were uncomfortable with what she was saying. She said, "Oh, I don't mean like a physical jihad. I mean a spiritual jihad." Now, technically, she's half right in this proposition. The term jihad within Islam can mean a spiritual struggle or an ideological one that doesn't involve actual physical violence. On that token, she's right, but here's, I think, the greater problem with what Sarsour is saying. Here you've got someone who's a figurehead of the Women's March sort of resist stuff, who nonetheless, isn't she the same individual who proclaimed that one of her female critics shouldn't even be allowed to have a vagina at one point? That doesn't sound very woman-friendly. And who now is proclaiming, oh, my primary responsibility is towards Allah. We're not going to assimilate. We need to defend our communities. This is a person who supposedly is standing for women's rights, but who sounds like a total zealot. As in, if she were carrying a Bible instead of a Quran, she would be considered a fringe evangelical on the same order as maybe the Westboro Baptists or some of the more out there Pentecostal movements, the snake handlers or snake oil salesmen. The sort of person who would perch a little box or a suitcase on the corner and start rambling about the New World Order. That is what Linda Sarsour would be, essentially, if she weren't Islamic. And the fact that she's sided with the left doesn't mean that the strange social issue haranguing is any different. Again, you get that sort of general stereotype of the right-wing fringe Christian supporting some out-there beliefs. And then you get an individual who is on the left, who is religiously Islamic, apparently, who's talking about her organized religious beliefs, and who's proclaiming herself to be a leader of women. I think that that's a little bit of a conflict of interest. I think if you are a religious zealot, who is part of a religion whose dogma, if taken literally, if taken at the token that a zealot would take it, is openly hostile towards women's rights, then it seems rather odd that this individual would be one of the speakers, like the keynote speaker of the Women's March. And the Women's March, the people organizing this sort of stuff, they be well warned. Women's rights are something that most Americans deeply agree upon. Most Americans don't want to denigrate the rights of females and want everybody to be treated equally. But when you get a religious zealot there to start speaking, somebody who is that toxic in your movement to be one of the figureheads thereof, it gives easy ammunition to anybody who wants to just dismiss everything else that you say. You could have 10 totally sane people saying totally sane things. You get one religious nut there, and it spoils everything. It's like with the Tea Party movement. A lot of the people who rose up sort of in the 2010 midterms, when the Tea Party became quite large, quite powerful at the time, totally overthrew the composition of Congress. It would have been much more longer lasting had they not had a handful of individuals saying totally off-the-wall things in association with that movement. They get somebody who is hyper-religious, who is hyper-partisan, and it spoils everything for everybody else. Occupy fell victim to the same thing. You get a lot of people who essentially, at the core, all they want is government accountability, and they want to stop bailing out banks and private corporations on the backs of the taxpayers. It then devolves over time and destroys itself because the movement becomes associated with a handful of nuts that proclaim themselves to be neo-Stalinists, who are openly Marxist, who are waving a communist flag, or doing drugs and having random orgies in one of these Occupy tent cities, and they get busted up by the cops, and they're littering everywhere and just being a disgrace generally. This is what happens. This is what's beginning to happen with at least segments of the new right. I use the term new, or I should say anti-left, anti-authoritarian, anti-left movement that you see on the right. You have some people who constantly goad others, and all they do all day, all they talk about is how much they hate some minority, how much they hate some religious group, how much they hate X, Y, and Z. They don't talk about how much they like their own status. They simply talk about how much they hate others. how they wish that we could bomb more people and stuff like that. And it denigrates the movement, because those are the people that are going to be fixated upon by your opponents. Linda Sarsour, regardless of her role in speaking for the Women's March, is going to become the face of the Women's March sort of thing, because she's the one who is going to say off-the-wall things and who is going to be declared the standard bearer of the Women's March in general. So somebody like myself, I support equality for women. I have no problem with the concept of women's rights. Traditional feminism I support, because I think that women are important to a society. Fairly straightforward, and I believe in equal rights for all citizens. But when you get somebody who is acting like Linda Sarsour does, associated with that movement, is there any chance that I am going to support it? No, absolutely not. And I'm not the only one who's going to think that way. The majority of the U.S. population will want nothing to do with your movement, and in fact will be goaded into opposing it explicitly, will probably come out against your movement specifically because you have somebody who's there talking about jihad against Trump. Now, it doesn't matter that she's... Remember, all-important topic, I've said it a dozen times, perception is greater than reality. The reality can be whatever it wants, but when you're talking about human opinion, perception is king. The way they perceive reality as being is more important because of cognitive dissonance, because of the simple psychology of man. The way they perceive reality is totally more important than the way it really is. So the Women's March could simply be about, well, you know, women should have equal pay, equal rights, you know, we're tired of being mistreated in the boardroom, blah, blah, blah. All well and good, wonderful. But the perception of your movement will be as a bunch of zealots who are apologistic towards Islamofascism, because people will additionally perceive her comments here as meaning literal physical jihad. And in association with her comments on assimilation and the importance, the central role of her religion, which means she is a religious fundamentalist, what we would call an evangelical if she were a Christian, that perception is not entirely inaccurate. The jihad part may be, although we only have her word to go on by what she actually means by using that term in that context. I'll just take her word for it on that one, I suppose, and exonerate her of the larger meaning. It doesn't matter. People are going to perceive it as a literal call to arms. Essentially, you're going to give easy and cheap ammunition to people who are actually worried that Sharia law will become a thing in the United States, or that pretty soon all their neighbors are going to be wearing burqas, the things that they see as anathema to women's rights. Most people in the U.S. are not religious zealots anymore. There was a time maybe 2 decades ago when most people considered themselves to be somewhat or highly religious. Those times are past. So then it's very funny to see a group that is going to associate itself predominantly with the left, predominantly with progressive issues and causes, inviting a religious bigot to come and speak for their movement. And she is a bigot. She has said things before that if she were of any other religion would be considered bigoted. The fact that a pass is given to this one specific religion to the exclusion of all others, whether it's Christianity, Hinduism, Judaism, someone who's atheistic, pagan, it doesn't matter, I think it bothers people at this point. I think it deeply bothers people who are we're just sort of emerging into the communication age, into the internet age, the social media age. From the dark ages of cable news and terrestrial radio and the religious zealotry that we had to deal with for so many decades. We had to deal with the tail end of the Cold War came with the remnant of that same Cold War that said, in God we trust, and those commies are a bunch of godless heathens. That's what it's really all about. We're starting to get away from that stuff, and all of a sudden the left that makes Russia an issue. You think it's coincidental that they're the same ones that are buddy-buddy now with theocratic Pope Francis? That they're the ones who want Sarsour to speak? That love Sadiq Khan or Angela Merkel with the Christian Democrats of Germany? All of these other presumably religious or quasi-religious individuals? Or that they have no problem with Clinton taking money from Qatar and Saudi Arabia? Again, theocratic regimes. Do you think that this is a coincidence or part of the larger social paradigm shift? The left in the United States is now the older side of the U.S. People, baby boomers who they still think the Democrats are like the Union Party. They're getting hoodwinked into supporting religiosity. And people, as they get older, there's a tendency to migrate into organized religion anyway, whereas younger individuals typically don't have time for this. Maybe they're spiritual, but they're not really religious. Maybe they're kind of sort of like liberally religious, like, hey, yeah, I went to church on Christmas, so I did my duty to Jesus Christ, or something like that. Same within Islam. Usually you get somebody in the US, I bet you'd take a look. I bet you'd find that most under 30 Muslims in the United States aren't really religious. Most people aren't really religious in this country. I have no problem with these individuals. It doesn't make any difference to me what religion they're following as long as they're not being zealots. If they're going to be violent, it doesn't matter either. It doesn't matter whether it's a violent Christian, a violent Muslim, a violent Jew, a violent, like an atheist who blows up a church or something like that. But the thing is, the left is increasingly embracing like theocracy. It's really weird. They're also, in their quest for globalism, they're also embracing the concept that they should be like applauding foreign leaders and say, screw the US leadership because we don't like Trump, or something like that. At the same time, they'll try to declare him a religious zealot. Now, you notice, they haven't said that lately, have they? They haven't talked about, oh, Trump, the evil religious Christian. They're getting off of that line. They don't want to be associated with it anymore. They want to brand themselves as, we're the mature ones. We're the ones that believe in Jesus Christ. Or Allah, apparently. But Linda Sarsour being associated with the Women's March isn't going to make the Women's March a better thing. It's going to make it fall apart. Because there are going to be a lot of secular individuals in the Women's March that at the very least roll their eyes a little bit when she's speaking. If not, get off board completely. You watch and it'll happen. That's about all. Peace out.